What up, y'all? Big Blue in the Bronx back with another New York Mets video, of course. And just remember to turn on those post notifications, like, comment, and subscribe. Share out if you can. Guys, we really do appreciate all the stuff that has happened for us in 2023. We're almost at the end of the calendar year now. We got about a few more shows slash live streams for y'all for this year, okay? And we got plenty of stuff that we're already planning in 2024. But for this video, guys, we're going to talk necessarily about the state of the New York Mets, the state of Steve Cohen, and what is their direction, and also is the backlash necessary in terms of all the anger towards Steve Cohen and the New York Mets' approach to this offseason so far. So let's start by this, right? 3 baseball seasons, Steve Cohen has been an owner for a New York Met, right? Right around the time of, I believe it was the end of December, early January. I don't remember the final purchase happened, but 3 full baseball seasons. So that's what he has under his resume. And I feel that as a Met fan or Mets fans, we have forgotten what it was like before Steve Cohen got here, and how bad it was under the Wilpons with Jeff and Fred running this organization for years. First off, and most notably, the major Ponzi scheme that the New York Mets were in because of their owners. They were actually good friends with Bernie Madoff at one point, and that is not hyperbole. That is a fact. Okay, they knew each other well business-wise. They knew each other personally. Okay, so they know that. They know what an awful person Bernie Madoff was when he was alive. He ran the biggest Ponzi scheme, and how that affected the Mets, right? Because we're not going to go into that whole thing with the case. But, I mean, for anyone that was around at that time or at least read or heard about it, knows who Bernie Madoff is. But Madoff, back then, he admitted to the prosecutors in his case, that he lost more than $50 billion that belonged to his investors. And so that affected the Mets because, the Wilpons were forced to take out loans, and I believe the total amount was actually $65 million at the time, just to meet payroll, including, loans from other baseball owners. So that's why, you had, you had weird contracts like the Bobby Bonilla deal. That's why, the Mets were always the second or third tier in the free agency market. Okay, they were never going after the big star. They were never going after, a blockbuster trade, because that just wasn't who they could be, because the Wilpons got themselves in this mess with Madoff. And not only that, but they were not good people at all, the Wilpons. I mean, Fred and Jeff, just terrible. I mean, the list goes on and on of all the stuff. Whether it's employees, I remember, they had to settle on a case because they were sued by a woman. I believe she worked in the ticket department or the sales department at the time, and she was suing them because he made comments of her about having a child out of wedlock, and it turns out he was guilty because he settled money, and when you settle money, it's just hush money, or trying to be hush money. We all know that and how that works. And also, his comments regarding Sandy Alderson, just ill-timed at the time. You kind of blamed him for the team failures. And you can call people out, right? But the man was battling cancer at the time. So it kind of doesn't really make sense to do that, for Sandy Alderson, which very poor timing on his part there. He had some issues with Pedro Martinez. Remember, he started him back in 2005 in that final regular season game. And, he had a foot issue. Pedro even wrote about it in his book that he came out with. It was years after this, obviously. And, the Wilpons basically forced him to play for ticket sales, which, it hurt Pedro in the long run because he couldn't play for the Mets for a while, because of the nagging injury. And that just was a whole mess in itself. Then you had him even going after David Wright, calling him just I believe what he called him. I believe he was just saying he's a good kid. They were a shitty team. He's a good kid. Didn't call him a superstar player when he pretty much was the Mets franchise at one point. And the piss poor product that they put around him. And so, It was just a mess after a mess that the failure and the disgust of the Wilpon ownership brought to this New York Mets reputation, and it's what they were symboled as, the jokes. That's what they were under the Wilpons. And to compare Steve Cohen to that now is preposterous, and we're going to get into that in a little bit of what he's done since he's been here and how they've been. Now, I'm not saying Steve Cohen is the grace of God and, that he deserves to be praised like the second coming of Jesus Christ. But nevertheless, we should, remember what it was like before he got here. I mean, the Wilpons, they just lost embarrassingly on and off the field. I mean, we can go through the problems, whether it was, Matt Harvey's cocaine issues that came out, whether it was, how they handled the Willie Randolph firing, how it's just a whole bunch of messes, like the signing of Jason Bay. I mean, just inept move after inept move under this direction. They always had to have a say in anything. And you remember Sandy Alderson, he's told the reporters in New York that, and this man battled cancer too, and he beat it. But he said the most stressful thing was working under Jeff Wilpon, because he always had to have a say in something, and he always had to put his input in. And even though it was probably the worst thing for the Mets, because he just could not help himself. But now you look at now, and I don't know how people are comparing Steve Cohen to that, just because the Mets haven't been as aggressive in free agency as they were last year. And, let's look at Steve Cohen, and let's look at so obviously his man, first go around, right? Billy Epler, right? We have to see the kind of players he acquired, and we know what Billy Epler was. He was a guy that was like, we know his plan, and he's going to buy. He wanted to be a playoff team. He did not want to rebuild. He did not want that, although he did have some strong drafts. I mean, time will tell and do tell in the future years, but he wanted to be buyers, and he wanted to be a playoff team each year. Now, the first year Mets lost in the wild card round to the Padres, and then last year, it completely flopped. But, when Epler came, he signed guys like Max Scherzer, Starling Marte, Mark Canha, Eduardo Escobar. He brought in Justin Verlander. He brought in Kodai Senga. He re-signed Brandon Nimmo and Edwin Diaz. So there is that as well. And, those were some good signings in there. Most of those guys aren't even part of the team anymore. I mean, the only guy that, was a free agent that he brought in that is still part of the team is Starling Marte, even though he's, Kodai Senga as well. But, that's what he wanted to do. When he made trades, they were low minimum trades to try and buy players. I mean, he had some bad ones in there, whether it was Danny Vogelback or Darren Ruff, as we like to know it, right? Those are probably the two doozies. I mean, there are some other ones in there. He brought in, like, Tyler Naquin. He brought in Brooks Raley, who actually was pretty good. He traded for Chris Bassett for a season. So, and that kind of worked out well-ish. Okay, he played good here at some parts, except toward the tail end. But, he was a buyer. Billy Epler was a buyer, and he wanted to be a competitive team each year. And the first season, it kind of worked. They won over 100 games, but they failed in the playoffs. And then last year was the complete flop. But to compare Steve Cohen to the Wilpons, and this is why I feel Mets fans truly do not understand why Steve Cohen is not even close to anything that's being described, because now he has learned from his mistakes, and he has put out a set forth plan for the New York Mets. What did he do? Well, first off, we have to go back to the trade deadline, because he did something that most owners won't do in New York sport, or in sports in general. And he sat up there and said, hey, we are not good enough to be a playoff team. We are simply not good enough. And so he sold the pieces that Billy Epler did. Now, I mean, obviously Epler sold those pieces because he was in talks with the owner. But Steve Cohen definitely had a decision on that. And then he let go of Buck and Epler, right? Both guys no longer here. And who does he bring in? He brings in David Stearns, a guy most known for getting talent or developing talent in the best way possible, or getting the best ounce of baseball in guys possible. And so that is exactly what the attack point has been for David Stearns, because what does he want? He won pitching and run prevention. So pitching and defense are the two major things that he has brought in. And now again, this offseason is not over. But let's see, who this man has brought in. So he's brought in Luis Severino. Okay? That's just one guy. He's brought in Michael Tonkin. He's brought in Jorge Lopez. He's brought in Trace Thompson now. I mean, these guys aren't superstars, but what he's trying to do is, build guys back up that were broken before. Now, I'm not saying this is going to work for every guy, because he's made a lot of moves, to invite minor leaguers to spring training or to get guys on cheap one-year deals, which may seem like he's being cheap, but Steve Cohen is not cheap. Remember, the Mets they had the highest payroll in baseball last year, and look what that took them. Nowhere. They were a bottom feeder team last year. So David Stearns has a new approach and says, hey, I'm going to try and get the best ounce of baseball out of some of these guys. Luis Severino, a guy, struggled heavily last year. And we've seen, and you Yankee fans, a lot of Yankee fans on this channel have seen it, where guys have a bad year or two and flourish in other places. I mean, most notably, Sonny Gray this year was a terrific pitcher for the Twins. Could not pitch in New York, and he looked phenomenal. Even to a lesser extent, Aaron Hicks was way better when he went to your own division in Baltimore. He wasn't a superstar, but he was way better than he was with the O's opposed to the Yankees. And, Severino's a guy with high upside, but, the injuries have been a problem, and you're hoping that Stearns, with the new pitching lab that they've been focused on, can get the best ounce of baseball out of him. And, you look at another guy, Michael Tonkin, another guy that was a Braves pitcher at one point. They're trying to see if either he could be someone valuable in that bullpen or someone else, maybe as a long reliever. Another guy that, I mentioned was Jorge Lopez, because Jorge Lopez was an all-star 2 seasons ago. He's been a veteran. He even had a connection with David Stearns, right? Back to his days in Milwaukee. And, he that's where he first got good, and then he had some struggles, but 2 seasons ago this guy was an all-star with Baltimore. Now he's been bounced around a little bit after that, but the Mets bring him in and say, what, maybe we can get the best ounce of baseball out of him. And another guy they bring in yesterday, Trace Thompson, the guy struggled a lot last year, but he did have a good season 2 years ago with the Dodgers. Pretty decent option off the bench, really solid depth piece. And you know what? If this is all the Mets are going to do, then there's a bit of an issue in the sense of, okay, we're not being as aggressive and we're kind of throwing the season away. Because we know with the current roster, we are not good enough to be a playoff team. However, the one thing I will say to that is, at least the Mets are building something young in the farm system. They are building something good over there. In fact, according to Bleacher Report, the latest prospect rankings of their updated farm system came out a few days ago, right? The Mets were ranked 4th amongst all MLB in terms of their prospects, right? And they have some really good ones. Now, I've always said they've had better position players than, pitchers. But you look at some of these guys, so when they trade Max Scherzer, they get Luis Angel Acuna. He's their best prospect right now, and he has been, they even have him on the 40-man roster, and they are very excited about his future. Unfortunately, Ronnie Mauricio, he was part of that list, played here last year, but remember, I put out the short a few days ago, torn ACL for him. So, that one is, that sucks, but they still got other guys. Jet Williams, the kid they drafted, been real solid for them. He's been shooting up the minors as another shortstop. Drew Gilbert, an outfielder. This is the kid they got in the Justin Verlander trade, along with Ryan Clifford, who looks solid. Kevin Parada, another prospect catcher they have. Colin Houck, another shortstop prospect they drafted. And starting the pitching side, Blade Tidwell, Mike Vassell. These guys could be mid starters. Christian Scott, a really sneaky guy in Double-A last year. So they got a lot of kids down in the system. They need more on the pitching side, but they have a lot of kids that are progressing quite nicely down there to start. And here's my overall point and overall, the purpose of this video. The reason that I feel that it's so preposterous to say David Stearns and Steve Cohen are acting like the Wilpons. Well, the Wilpons didn't have a plan. They were cheap. They were foolish because they were in, with Bernie Madoff. But there's actually a plan here because they're looking at getting the best ounce of baseball out of some of these guys. And not only that, the offseason's not over. They had meetings with Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Okay, Steve Cohen flew to Japan to go meet with him. He said, you know what? We really want you, and we really hope, you can, and we really hope we can acquire you on this team. And I know there's a lot of other interest out there with the Yankees, the Phillies, the Dodgers, all the big name teams. The Giants have some interest as well, the Red Sox. So there's plenty of teams that are bidding for him, and it's going to be highest bidder. And I don't think Steve Cohen's not going to bid on this guy. He wants him badly. They could also, if they've shown interest in Shota Imanaga, the other lefty, the lefty from Japan. So they've shown some interest in guys. There's been reported interest in Jorge Soler. A guy I've loved over the years. I mean, I know he's played on some rival teams, but he's a very good power bat. No matter where he's gone, had a very solid year with the Marlins last year, and is definitely looking to make some money. But my point is, again, you cannot compare them to the Wilpons. There is an actual plan here, and whether they're not as aggressive here in free agency, just remember, they have kids coming up. They can always do it again next year because Steve Cohen said he was looking toward the future for 2024 and 2025. And I don't expect this Mets team to be World Series contenders in 2024. They damn well not be better bottom feeders, but I expect them to at least try and compete for a playoff spot. That's my realistic expectation. So all these guys complaining out there that they didn't get Ohtani and they didn't trade for Soto, it's just simply not in the cards for us. And you know what? That's okay because at least there is some sort of direction and plan that the team has stepped from the middle of last year and are looking to build into this year. So that again, let me know what you guys think in the comments section, okay? I hope I gave my position very clearly onto why I think, Steve Cohen and David Stearns shouldn't be getting so much backlash. And, for what they've done so far. And again, if more news comes out and more information comes out, who knows? Maybe I change my opinion based on what I've seen. But I'm not going to criticize them just yet. So, again, thanks for watching. Thanks to you all for all the support. And I will see you guys in the next one.